we are going to speak about the European Accessibility Act 1 year after it came into place, and we're going to see how the market is evolving after this very important milestone. What is the biggest consequence on the level of accessibility even around the globe, and what to expect if you're a company operating in Europe in terms of enforcement and obviously, and most of all, we're going to see how to tackle the process, the issue of compliance, and how to make sure that your organization can become fully accessible and inclusive. Before we start, I would like to So you probably couldn't hear that, and it's an example of what happens if your video doesn't have subtitles. And as you can see, it can be very frustrating. So imagine that around 59 million people in Europe can have this type of experience if you forget about accessibility. Plus, don't forget about people that are watching it in a very noisy or public space, so it doesn't affect only people with disability. So it's an example that we want to give, obviously, to show you how our accessibility is not really only a compliance aspect, and we believe it can give you a good understanding. There are a ton of examples that we could do like this, but please, in general, when you approach this topic, the biggest advice that we can give you is to do it with a bit of empathy. So think about who could be on the other side of what you're producing or what you're releasing or what you're shipping to production, and understand what could be their specific need to make sure that everyone can really use and access your environment. Moving on to the actual topic, we would like to start with an overview of how accessibility evolved from 25 to 26. Obviously, the legislative push had a very big impact on how companies are starting to focus on the topic of accessibility. The regulation in the USA has been going for a long time, and obviously that has a big impact in that sphere. But on the contrary, we have seen the explosion of vibe coding and the releases of environment that are not really properly managed in the sense of having a good design to production process. And this is why we can see, first of all, the massive amount of creation of new digital touchpoints, and the fact that the level of accessibility didn't really improve. It's actually decreased, and this is very important because on one hand, we need to look at regulation as a good push to do things properly and to make environment accessible, but it's really important that we don't think that technology will solve it all automatically. AI will simply solve accessibility, and that we can, let's say, do the bare minimum and wait because things will just get better. We are seeing how, especially due to vibe coding, and again, the vast creation of content, things are not really getting better. And so it's really important that if you are a responsible business owner and you want to have an impact and you want to have access to a broader portion of the market, and then also, by the way, be compliant, this needs to be handled with great care to avoid this kind of degeneration. So we can see how unreadable text and product description has a spike in accessibility issues. Checkout, registration, and contact form, I believe it's one of the biggest example. Like we are using forms to do everything, to book, to log in, to buy, to purchase, to do anything that is like almost everything that goes online happens with a form at one stage of the flow. And the fact that 1 out of 2 has accessibility issues gives you the idea of still how far we are from making proper step towards accessibility. And invisible CTAs, if you're working in marketing and you have a CTA that goal of that CTA is generally conversion, and having issues there, it's quite a big miss. So these are some sources and some data that we took from the WebAIM million report, which is a massive job done by WebAIM every year on 1 million web pages. And again, we hope that it can give you an idea of also what we want to explain today, no? So that on one hand, compliance needs to be handled, and it's for sure a push, but we really need to take care of the quality to avoid that the goal of regulation is shadowed by how we approach this topic. Moving on. We can see also some details about the evolution of errors between different languages. Again, we can see how the impact of ADA is putting English content at the real top, and how, in general, nevertheless, because of what we said, the great creation of content, of automatic content, is actually resulting in a decrease in accessibility level. And again, moving on, we can also see some different spread of data when it comes to the difference between different CMS. Obviously, the role of CMS here is super important. Like if they are providing the way for SMEs to create their environment, and the way for companies to create websites, it's super important that there are some strong fundamentals of accessibility by design. Here with us, we have the great luck of having Neil Horridge, who is our chief of product, but was the head of accessibility in Wix, and we can see how the work that Neil done over the year is paying off, and we can see how Wix is among the top CMS provider when it comes to accessibility. But nevertheless, even when at the core, so let's say the infrastructure and the content management system is really investing into accessibility fundamentals, there is still a gap to fill, and there are still errors that needs to be handled. And this is where, again, it's important to underline your responsibility as a business owner to make sure that accessibility is completely handled and covered. Moving on, and before we let it off to an understanding of the regulation and how the regulation evolved, I just want to take a second to underline and to frame accessibility in a sentence. So you saw the example, and you saw how accessibility can impact many different people and profiles. Let's just frame it for a second. In order to be accessible and compliant, a website needs to make sure that it is usable by all users. And so this can be disabilities of sensory disability, motor disability, cognitive disability. So it's not like only for blind people, which is a common thing that we hear when we speak to users and to clients. And so this level of accessibility and usability needs to be reached. It needs to be maintained over time, and it needs to be proven with certain legal frames. No? So the legislators around Europe are asking, and the European Accessibility asks to make sure that you are showing how you are monitoring accessibility, because of what we just saw, and so how much technology is evolving and the digital ecosystem of the web is evolving. So browsers are evolving and CMS are evolving. It's super important there is a monitoring activity that can monitor and avoid any regression. And ideally, an organization should move left as much as possible and shift left. And so make sure that accessibility is handled not only to fix what is currently broken, but to really embed it as something that is taken care from the very beginning. So keep this in mind, so that we try to do this introduction to frame the situation, the market, what are the forces that we play with automations, etc. Now I would leave it to Cecilia to explain and to give a recap of what is required and how this is changing, and then we're going to see a bit how we can solve it and make sure that the organization can become accessible.
Thank you, Edo. So yes, before we take a look at what's been happening on the ground since last year, I want to make sure that we're all working from the same legal foundation. And so we're going to look at how the legal framework actually is looking right now. So the European Accessibility Act, the EAA, became enforceable on June 28 of 2025. The EAA as a directive sets out what must be achieved, but it doesn't on its own tell businesses how to achieve it technically. And this is where the EN 301-549 comes in. This is the harmonized European standard for ICT accessibility. So essentially, you can think of it as a technical rule book that sits behind the directive. And it's what auditors reference, and it's what regulators point out to when they have to assess the compliance of the service or the product. And also, it's crucial to remember that the EN 301-549 is built on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 at level AAA. One important thing looking forward that we have to look at is that the WCAG 2.2 is expected to become the updated baseline for the harmonized European standard. So if you're currently benchmarking against the 2.1 version, the horizon is moving, and it might be good to start looking at using the 2.2. So now that we're sort of clear on what the legal backbone is, the obvious question that comes to mind is, what does the directive apply to? So the EA is not a blanket rule, let's say, that applies to every website or every business, but it's sector specific, and understanding whether you fall within the scope is the first compliance question that you need to answer. So the directive applies to services directed at consumers. So e-commerces, banking and financial services, passenger and transports across air, bus, rail, also sea. But it also applies to electronic communication, audiovisual media access platforms, and also ebooks and reading softwares. So if your business operates in any of these areas and serves consumers, you are in scope and you have to apply the directive. There's one critical point that we need to flag specifically, and that often catches businesses off guard, is that if a service is offered to both consumers and professional, so for example, an e-commerce that serves end users, but also professionals, the entire service must comply. So not just the consumer-facing layer, but the whole service. At the same time, the EAA provides for an exemption, specifically for microenterprises providing services. So it's narrow and requires cumulative requirements to be met. So to become a microenterprise, or to be a microenterprise, better said, a business must have fewer than 10 employees and an annual turnover of no more than 2 million euros. And both conditions must be satisfied simultaneously. So if you exceed either threshold, the exemptions does not apply. Now, so we have looked at who is affected and who isn't, and we have to look at what happens essentially when you don't comply. So we have to look at the sanctions, because the numbers vary significantly across member states. So as we said, when we look at the penalties, the range is quite, it's non-uniform. So we have to look at the different ones. So Sweden, we can look that sits at the top end. So fines can go up to 900,000 euros. Germany also hits quite a ceiling with 100,000 euros per violation, so they can accumulate essentially. Austria's fines can go up to 80,000 euros, while France considers violations a class 5 offense, and there's also daily fines that can apply that can go up to 300,000 euros. Italy, and we'll come to that shortly as well when we look at the enforcement of Italian legislation, goes up to 40,000 euros. But it's also important to remember that if you're a company with over 500 million euros in turnover, the applicable fines goes up to 5% of the annual turnover. So quite an hefty fine. And finally, we have Ireland, which decided to take a completely different approach, because in addition to financial penalties, there are serious violations that can result in up to 18 months of imprisonment. So this is quite a thing to consider when we look at the sanctions for Ireland. And at the same time, it's important to remember that across all jurisdictions, the penalties are not limited to fines. Indeed, regulators also have the power to order the withdrawal of products or the suspension of services from the market, both temporarily or permanently. And for a digital business, this is potentially existential, so we have to keep that in mind. So at the same time, the numbers, obviously, of the sanctions tell part of the story, but as we'll see in the enforcement cases coming up, the real cost often isn't the fine itself, but it's what comes before it and everything that compounds once proceedings start. So I'll hand it over back to Eduardo, and we'll walk through some real enforcement cases that have been going on since June 2025.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, we're going to see a few cases that happen across Europe and also in countries that are not so in the European Union. We believe these are good examples also to show what is the impact then on organization when this process starts, because obviously everything is quite silent until then the actual check on a specific company starts, and that becomes a bit more hectic. So we can see how in Norway, for example, again, in compliance with the European Accessibility Act because of the economic space. And this also should generally raise awareness of the fact that you are exposed for every country that you operate in Europe, not necessarily only on the legislation in which your company is based. After a health portal used by 400,000 people was found with accessibility errors or many different requirements, they were asked to remediate, and for every day after the due date, there was a fine of 4,500 euro a day. So similar to what also Julia said about the type of enforcement that can be done in France, and without a ceiling. So this situation, as of now, is still ongoing, and you can see how pressing becomes economically towards the organization, and how certain enforcement can be very harsh on the matter. Moving on to other examples, we can see how, for example, in Sweden, we are seeing very proactive audits. So, for example, we can see how the Post and Telecom Authority launched its first regulatory cases in October 25, targeting mainly large e-commerce, and not in response to complaints or not in response to users, but actually selecting them and going for scrutiny. Very similar enforcement we are also seeing in Austria, as we will see later. And again, another example is how in the Netherlands, company with incomplete submissions of compliance statement within a specific due date were flagged for priority audits in early 26. In general, you don't, even though the claims from users are one of the biggest and most the highest risk, simply for a statistical purpose. The more traffic you have, the higher the probability that the user will raise a flag against your level of accessibility. We can see how authorities are really starting to be organized, placing funds and people and resources to really do proactive scrutiny and function as a counterpart to user claims. Moving on. For the example of Austria, Ceci, I let you explain. You are muted.
You're right, I was muted. Sorry. This was not another thing to check. So yes, for Austria, there were initial accessibility audits that were completed with us before the European Accessibility Act deadline. But at the same time, there were errors that were found in the audit, and they were corrected. However, the re-audit, which is usually encouraged to do, was not performance due to cost and domain changes. So they had decided to not proceed with them. However, the problem was that in July 2025, the Ministry of Social Affairs sent a formal letter requesting compliance plan and the timeline for digital barriers removal. So essentially, they checked the audits that were done, and they checked the websites, and they requested that all the errors that were found would be corrected. However, the company response, even though it was given to the authority, was deemed insufficient because the regulator required to fix a defined set of issues. So it's when the authority decided to talk to them, they couldn't decide what errors they had to fix, but it was the authority who told them what to do. And obviously, we see here that when you have a very short amount of time where you have to fix the errors, this might become a problem because you might not have the same attention even to details that you might have before when the authority isn't there to tell you what to do. So what we're doing now as a company is that we have provided them with an AccessiWay platform that is being used to manage an ongoing project, to solve the errors and the issues and to improve the accessibility of the touch points. On the AccessiWay platforms, I won't talk much about because we have Nir later will explain it in detail, and he's much more aware of me of the service. So this essentially is a case for Austria, but at the same time we have to look at what happened in the rest of Europe, and specifically we're looking at what France, for example, did. So Edo, I'll let you go back to it for France.
Yeah, thank you for giving that visibility. Important case again. So in the case of Austria, just a comment. It's a classic case in which accessibility is approached and it started, but then is not treated with the proper prioritization. And then we can see how it becomes an urgent matter when then the authority enters in place. So starting is obviously the very first thing, and we understand how case by case prioritization and budget allocation can push you to decide to do it step by step. But eventually, it's something that needs to be done completely. Otherwise, there is a risk of not only having issues with the authority and needing to fix with a very limited source of time allocation, but there is a high risk of reputation. Again, in France, we can see how, in this case, NGOs organized to send legal letters and complaint to all the major distributor of chains of food, so Auchan, Carrefour, Leclerc, and Picard, to raise the fact that their e-commerce was not accessible, giving them a deadline before starting an actual procedure of lawsuit against these brands, and all of them have been affected mediatically and are now under the process of fixing while handling the litigation against users. And so we believe it's the last example to show you how from June 25 until now, we have very different cases in which authority can go proactively, users can go proactively, mediatically you can have different consequences, and all of this is leading to, again, the consequence that and as we can see in the next slide, is leading to the risk of not really allocating the time properly. In the case of Italy, we can see how the regulation is one of the in the situation in which the authority is slowly gearing up to the enforcement and working exactly with the two angles of users on one side and proactive check on the other side. You can see how from June we had the regulation entered into place. For March of 26, the specific guidelines for accessibility were published. 11 March was published the platform in which users can signal website and send complaints. 15th of May, they published the precise ruling of how the enforcement will be executed by AGID. And again, it's one of those cases in which both users and authority is at the center of enforcement. What I was saying before, and sorry, this is the next slide actually, is we continue. My bad. We continue with certain examples. Gigi, I let you continue, and then I'll add my point at the end.
Thank you, Edo. Don't worry, I will let you get to that slide. It's really important. So for a long time, yes, Germany was something of a question mark. The BFSG, which is the German's transposition of the European Accessibility Act, came into force on June 28, 2025, alongside every other member state. However, the enforcement body behind the regulation was largely invisible. The law existed, but the regulator didn't have a face yet, we can say. But however, that changed in autumn of 2025 because all 16 German federal states reached an agreement and a treaty to establish a single joint authority through the treaty, as we said. And this is the MLBF, and that formally began operations on September 26 of 2025. So what's new as of 2026 is that BLBF, so the authority, has its own public website, which is really important. And for the first time, it's published exactly how it intends to operate. And before this, the businesses had very little visibility on what to expect, but now obviously they do, and it's really important also to see how the authority operates. Indeed, it operates on two distinct models. There is essentially what we talked about. So it operates reactively and also proactively. So when it's operating reactively, it responds to reports from both consumers but also businesses. So essentially, anyone who encounters an accessibility barrier on a product or a service covered by the BFSG can submit a report directly to the authority. And the authority can check, and if necessary, they can start proceedings against the company that is found uncompliant. At the same time, as we've mentioned before, it can operate proactively. So it conducts its own market surveillance based on a strategy that was published in January 29th of this year. And it is a documented framework that defines the enforcement priorities, but also a risk-based inspection approach and criteria for selecting the investigation targets. So this means essentially that you do not have to be complained about to be investigated, but the regulator can come to you. So it's really important to be prepared, as we've seen in the enforcement cases, to work proactively and not reactively. It's the best way to respond to a regulator working proactively as well. And also this is important because, as we've seen for the sanctions, if a non-compliance is found in Germany, the fines can go up to 100,000 euros per violation. So it's not exactly a small fine. At the same time, and this is what I really want you to hold on to before we move on. Is that the regulatory risk in Germany? It's actually only part of the picture, because there is a second layer of risk that operates entirely outside the regulator, and in many ways it's much more immediate. And what I'm talking about is the German Unfair Competition Act, the UWG, because it creates a mechanism unlike anything else that we see in the European accessibility enforcement landscape at the moment. Indeed, the logic is that under the BFSG, accessibility obligations are classified as market conduct rules. And what that means in practice is that they don't just create a relationship between a company and a regulator, but they also create a relationship between competitors. And competition law is taken very seriously in the European Union. So if a website is inaccessible, a competitor whose website is accessible can make a legally credible argument that you have an unfair cost advantage because you didn't spend time and money on accessibility work like they did. So their asymmetry in German law is actionable, and it's actionable through the German Competition Unfair Competition Act. So the mechanism is that a formal cease and desist letter can be sent, and it doesn't require a regulator to be involved at any point. So the compliant competitor or a consumer protection association, for example, can send you the letter directly, and the letter demands three things. One is that you fix the violation, obviously. Second is that you sign a declaration committing not to repeat it, and also that you pay the legal cost. So you have to consider the dynamics here to understand why it's particularly dangerous. There is no investigation phase, so the cease and desist letter can arrive very quickly after violation is spotted. The cost of responding is significant, even if you prevail, and the parties who can bring it have an actual direct financial incentive to do so. And the irony, or maybe better, the paradox of the mechanism is that the first companies in any sector that achieve compliance don't just reduce their own regulatory risk, but they actually acquire a legal instrument against everyone who doesn't. So being late doesn't just mean exposure to the regulator, as we've seen just a few minutes ago, but it also means that compliant competitor can actively pursue you. And it is a well-established mechanism in German law that has been widely used for copyright and also trademark enforcement for decades now. And now it's also applied to accessibility for the first time. So this is something that it's really important to keep in mind. So now we've essentially covered the legal framework. We've seen the enforcement landscapes across jurisdictions and the specific risks for Italy and Germany. But at the same time, there's one more dimension of risk that I will let Edo explain in a little bit more detail.
Finally, it's my favorite slide. No, so yeah, that's the topic that we want to really raise today, and the main thing that we want you to focus, because we are often engaging with companies that are waiting to act and to see, and that okay, I'll wait for enforcement to be more in place, to be more frequent, to be more broad, etc. Or also, yes, I will start for now, but I will start with a very minimal activity, just starting to do something towards accessibility, hoping that it's enough, and then they will kind of wing it as it goes. But we are really seeing across all the geos that we operate, and we're getting many clients coming to us with emergency requests because they're being scrutinized, because they receive a complaint, because they need to fix now with a specific deadline, and because now the deadline is not only internal, but it's also tied to the economic risks that and also specific fines that it can be eventually even day by day. And so the biggest advice that we can give here is that the smartest and cheapest and optimal way of approaching accessibility is really by doing it in a thorough way, and as soon as possible incorporating into your processes, to avoid a situation where being reactive is also the most costly situation that you can face. And so this is the biggest impact that we see probably 1 year after the enforcement, and what is important to keep in mind when approaching the matter. But now, to start speaking about some solutions, I'll pass it over to Nir so that we can see together how we can do this properly.
So if you think now at this point that you should start doing something about it, let's talk a little bit about how we can help you. So first of all, we are the fastest growing digital accessibility company in Europe. We have huge customers and a lot of customers and a lot of experience. And our goal is just to make the web accessible for everyone, which means very high quality. So the people with disabilities will really have good solutions, and the customers will be really protected, but also on very large scales. So the impact will not be very specific and pinpointed. Let's go to the next slide. And the way we are doing it is actually we have a hybrid combination of a great team of experts who are done thousands of accessibility audits over the year. They are very, very professional. They care about accessibility, not only from a legal perspective, but because they really think it's the right things to do and the world need to be more accessible. And we combine it with technology and product solution that make it both more efficient for our experts to work and consistent, but also for our customers to understand at any given point what they have to do, what is the most critical thing to take care of today. If they're looking at the bigger picture of several touch points on websites, which one I should do now, but also what I have to do and how to fix it. It's not only leaving you with saying to you that you have here a problem, it's explaining what the problem is, what the solution that needs to be done to the code snippet level if needed. And I would like to share with you a quick video of our platform.
Your organization cares about digital accessibility. You've run the audits, exported the issues, assigned the tickets, and then quietly things slip time and time again. Not because your team doesn't care, but because caring isn't a scalable system. Until now. The AccessiWay platform centralizes everything your organization needs to manage digital accessibility. Simply, continuously, without hassle.
Not once a year, but every single day.
See every barrier across every digital property. Then assign, track, and resolve all issues. The platform doesn't just show you what's broken. It gives your team the workflows to actually fix it, ensuring an ongoing path towards compliance. Human expertise doesn't go away. The platform simply ensures accessibility is managed smoothly and without friction. Because the organizations that get this right don't just avoid risk. They build something better, a digital world where everyone is included. AccessiWay platform, built for you to build for all.
So again, the goal is not only to help you in the starting point, in understanding where your problems are, how to solve them, and help you track the solutions. We also continue with you later to monitoring to make sure nothing is there are no regressions in the problems, and even furthermore to help you with the shift left that Edo mentioned earlier, will help you to prevent accessibility issue from happening, which is the cheaper, more efficient, and higher quality way to deal with accessibility. Let's go to the next one. We are helping you in several different ways, and by being at every step of the way with you. So if you need to understand what issues do you have currently on your website, what to do about them, which one is more important, how to solve them, everything you need to do, including returning them back to our experts to verify that you fixed them correctly. You can do it from the platform. You can manage in case of bigger companies that have multiple websites. You can have one view of all the websites in one place to constantly be aware of where do you need to focus right now. And all this is connecting to your Jira directly. So not only can you have the visibility of what's the status, but already push it directly to the people who needs to understand it and solve it from technical perspective. And Jira is the first one. More integrations are in the work as we speak right now. And the idea is that, again, we are with you all along the way. When you start, some companies, by the way, are at different maturity level of accessibility. So some of them just don't know where to start, don't know what the status really is, and we can help with that. Some companies already understand what is the status, but they don't know what to do about it, how to fix it, and then how to monitor it. So again, for no matter at what step of maturity or in the journey of accessibility you are, we are with you. And it's important to say that accessibility is a journey. It's not a project. It's like performance. It's a quality thing that you will keep working on, because there is always more to do, there is always more to improve. It's not only for the compliance, it's just also because you release new pages, you release new websites, you release new products, and always you will have to take care of accessibility, again, both in the process of how you build stuff, but also to verify that what you release to production is compliant and is correct, and we are there with you all the time, all the steps. Next one. Now, some additional motivation. We mentioned mostly that the accessibility we mentioned it from the legal perspective, but it's important to understand that there are more reasons. Some of them are actually better than the legal perspective to why you should do accessibility. The first one is, of course, inclusion. We want people with disabilities to have the same opportunities and options as anyone else, no matter their ability. So once you make your website accessible, you include more people and you give them more opportunities, because now they can also become your customers, which in its way says that when you make your website accessible, you basically open the door of your business to more people. We are talking about 1 billion people in the world today who are defined as people with disabilities. Make your website accessible, you are increasing the potential buyers or people going into your business dramatically. In addition, needless to say, that a website that invests, that is doing good to help communities with disabilities, is the positive impact on the brand. And making accessibility is basically making things better for everyone. So usually every investment that you are doing in accessibility is not only good for people with disabilities, it's making your whole product or solution more usable for everyone, because accessibility is accessibility for everyone. It's not accessibility for people with disabilities only. It's making everything more accessible. Let's continue to the next one, because this is one example for how when you make things accessible, you're making your solution better. So in order for people who are blind to be able to navigate your website, one of the requirements is that the heading hierarchy, for example, will be correct, and some semantics will be correct, and that the website code will be written correctly, so the screen reader that the blind people are using will be able to read the website correctly. But what happens also is that Google robots who are going to index the websites for search are also able to read your website better when you make it the semantics and the structure and the HTML better. And so by making the website more accessible for people with screen readers or using screen readers, you are actually improving your SEO all the time. And this is a repeating theme in accessibility. When you make a high contrast for people who are low vision, it also helps just anyone who works with the phone in a sunny day. And every improvement of accessibility makes the solution the better, and the solution, the website better for everyone. So you are anyway, it's a win-win situation. You are less exposed to legal action, but also you're opening the business, helping people, and increasing the potential revenue that can come to your business. Let's go to the next one. And if you got all the way to this point, congrats, you deserve something for it. So we invite you to scan this QR code to schedule a demo. And if you are going to do it soon, there is also a 30% discount coupon that you can enjoy. And we think talk to us, ask us any question. We're here to help you. We're here to help you succeed and be protected. And I would also like to open now the few minutes that we got left to questions, if you have some right now, about any topic.
Thank you very much, Nir. Thank you all for your attention so far. We see that there are some questions. So besides the fact that you will receive all this documentation as a follow-up, about the question that we see on the controls currently in place, we try to cover with some different examples. The general situation, as we see, is that the enforcement is twofold. No, there is a important power given to users and their ability to signal and flag a website without proper accessibility that will trigger the authority control and enforcement, generally with a higher priority, because obviously when a user with disability acts, then there is a expedite process in that regard. And then there is the proactive, as we said, check of accessibility by authorities. The extent and the effort changes locally based also on the resources of or the strategy applied by the single authorities, but it's definitely increasing. In general, today, we hope that you found this session useful. The goal was to give a view of how things are evolving, how solution needs to be really looked from a complete and comprehensive point of view, how it's important to understand where you are and how to get to a path that can bring you to proper accessibility by design, in order to obviously avoid fines, but most of all, make your environment accessible and make sure that you really reach more people, but by doing so, you generally improve the way that you communicate with the public. So if we can help you doing so, we're very happy. So please reach out again to us. You have all the links and the material to do so. We are really waiting for you to try to help you in this process and to make the web a better place. I would like to thank you again, Nir, for the presentation of the solution, Cecilia for the outstanding explanation of where we are legally, the AccessiWay team, and Svetlana for organizing and putting everything together, and all of you for bearing with us for 15 minutes of this very important topic. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.